Good evening, everyone. We are members of MGMT 3004 Group 5. And today we are fortunate to invite Mr. Wang, an entrepreneur from Beijing, China. His family manages the leading enterprise in jade mining and processing. The mining site is in Northeast Province. He knows this industry very well and has innovative insights. He aims to enable the enterprise to provide better jade products and services. I believe that today's exchange with him will be very meaningful. Hello, Mr. Wang. And thank you very much for taking the time to participate in our interview. We wanted to know more about you and the background of this industry. Hello.
Nice to meet you. I'm an entrepreneur in a traditional jade industry company. Because of the advantages of the place of origin, we discovered the great value of jade mining and processing at the beginning of the 20th century. My elders have become the founders of this industry. The jade industry is not only a resource business, but also a business that requires business strategy. Really determines how far an enterprise can go. It's not the amount of minerals. It's whether ordinary stones can be turned into good product and reputation. To this end, we have established stable material selection standards at the mining end, enhance the core processes at the processing end, and insisted on clarifying the origin, technology, and the cultural value at the sales end. Let customers buy with peace of mind and be willing to buy back. The family business can continue to develop because we have transformed our resource advantages into business capabilities.
And that's wonderful. I'm even more curious about your personal upbringing. Born into a family with a long history in the jade industry, what's special about your education background?
I think my educational background is similar to that of ordinary people, but in an environment with a strong business atmosphere. I learned to communicate better with people very early. For example, clarify the needs of buyers, learn to negotiate correctly, and so on. Because I often come into contact with various products, I gradually know how to see the quality of a piece of jade, like its quality or value. Another point is that entrepreneurs need strong execution ability and business acumen. I can take the initiative to discover some new markets and conduct social service. Fight for these hidden opportunities by myself. I think these abilities are the most valuable.
Well, we can learn these entrepreneurial uh, skills from you. Thank you for sharing. The next question is, could you describe the entire process of a jade article from its place of origin to the final customer? And where are the greatest risk and profit margin respectively.
For the process, firstly, the customer first places an order and pays the deposit. And we will go to the milling area to find suitable stones or process the jet that has been cut. Of course, we need to measure the material cost and labor cost, which must not exceed the client budget. When the customer sees the finished product and thinks there is no problem, they will pay the final payment. For the biggest risk, the basic risk is that after the customer paid the deposit, we went to process the jet. If the customer doesn't want the finished product, we won't get the final payment. Misunderstandings may arise during communication, or there may be problems with our carrying, both carrying inherent risks. If the jet has already been covered and we cannot find a buyer for it quickly, and our income and expenses will become unbalanced. Repeated occurrences of this will definitely impact our operation.
What about the second point?
The second point is the profit margin. We need to pay the government land use fees and minerals use fees and some tax every year. This is the biggest expense. Next is the cost of running an enterprise, including the rent of factories and warehouses, working wages, etc. The full payment paid by the customer minus and the cost is our profit. This profit margin will change with the price of jet and the labor cost. When the economy is on the rise, people are more willing to buy a jet products to show their identity. The higher profit we get.
Okay, thank you for your analysis. This is our first time coming into contact with the jade industry, and your explanation has given us a very clear understanding. We would also like to know which part of the process, mining, processing, and sales, creates the greatest value. Hope you can give us some examples.
Judging from my personal experience, it's not a part that really creates the greatest value. The stage of combining processing and sales is the key inflection point of value jump. By judging the structure and color of the stone, we can transform the stone into jet with aesthetic and cultural significance. For example, some real stones may be defective. We will incorporate the design to create small handicrafts to enhance its value. The sales part determines whether the value can be realized. If jet of the same quality is only sold as ordinary goods, the price space is limited. But when we use our own experience to tell customers about the source, technology, and the cultural implication. The market is willing to pay for this added value.
So I feel that you are a person with a great culture and aesthetic sense. As a consumer, I also prefer to communicate with people who have stories to tell. So you have endowed this jade with a deeper value. And so in the early stage of starting businesses, and do you prefer to the cautions and test the waters or just do it first and thinking about it later? Has your attitude towards risks changes as your enterprise grows larger?
Thanks for your appreciation. Personally, I prefer to be cautious in the early stage of starting a business. Because the jet industry has a high cost and a long cycle. Once the judgment is wrong, credibility and cash flow will be lost. My recent experience is to develop the market in Indonesia. First, it's necessary to know the local market price, jet reserves, and the buyer's preference. I went to the local wholesale market and the business districts to investigate the types and the price of jet transaction. Well, looking for buyers in small batches, I can accept a low profit, but I pursue is stable sales and instant refunds. This is a healthy cash flow. What I said above is what I have made in the early stage. I will also communicate with businessmen to gain experience, such as the rules of the industry. The most important thing is that the introduction of jet requires the approval and the feeling of the state and the government. We need to arrange these things in advance. Well, as the company grows, my attitude towards risk will definitely change. It's best to predict and assess risk before expansion. Previously, I relied on intuition to avoid risk. Now I use clearly processes. For example, I break down procurement, processing, and delivery into phases and set key monthly KPI. We only need to look at a few key figures each month. For procurement, we look at real material quality and cost. For processing, we look at yield rate and on-time delivery. For delivery, we look at timely payment and customer certification. If any of these figures deteriorate, I slow down expansion. I address the immediate problems before moving forward. This reduces major mistakes and keep the teamwork more standardized.
So when you first started scaling up the businesses and expanding to more cities, What would you see was the biggest challenge you faced at that time?
Looking back at the stage when we were trying to expand to more cities, I'd say there were three main challenges. The first, I think, is the problem of funds. The meaning of jet is a high input and a long cycle industry. Before the formal meaning, we need to advance a large amount of funds, including labor cost, equipment investment, and the relevant taxes and the fees paid to the state. In practice, the deposit paid by customers is often not enough to cover this upfront cost. So the enterprise itself must have sufficient cash flow reserves. If the capital reserve of enterprises or individuals is insufficient, it will be difficult to complete the mining stage smoothly, and it will not be possible to enter subsequent processing, transportation, and sales processes, which will directly affect the normal operation of the whole business. The second obstacle is the trust between buyers and seller. In the jet industry, if the two parties cannot establish the basic relationship of trust, it will be difficult to promote the project. For example, the signing of contracts, the transportation arrangement of jet, and the payment of the payment in the later stage will be affected. More importantly, once this trust is missing, it will have a continuous negative impact on the long-term cooperation and the corporate reputation. Thirdly, the third aspect is the stability of the supply chain, especially involving overseas transportation. Due to the large difference is the regulatory policies and the custom requirement of mineral resources in different countries. For example, Indonesia's relatively strict requirement for the quantity and the process of mineral exports have increased the uncertainty cross-border transportation. In terms of transportation, if you choose sea transportation, the cost is relatively low, but you need to bear the risk that jet may be damaged during transportation. If you choose air transportation, the transportation cost will increase significantly. In order to strike a balance between cost and security, we usually conduct a detailed risk assessment in advance before expanding the scale, including the mode of transportation, route selection, and the possibility of potential loss.
So that sounds like a really challenging period. So when did your company first start expanding its scale?
And the first time we expand our operation was in, I remember it's in the 1970s.
You mentioned that the company first expanded back in the 1970s. Over such a long period of development, were there any major crises or difficult moments that really impacted the business? If so, what happened? And how did you respond to it afterwards?
Sure, there was a particularly serious crisis, and it happened around 2017. At that time, some local government encouraged enterprises to participate in P2P internet loan projects in order to broaden financing channels. In the early communication, this project tend to focus on the fact that they had a background of state ownership or government sponsors. Therefore, we were comparatively positive regarding the risk judgment of such ventures in the ambience during this period. We have invested large-scale funds after establishing that the so-called state on the participation background is available in the concerned platform. Nevertheless, it has been established later that the investment in itself is never safe. It doesn't imply that it's absolutely safe. When there is a policy or state-owned endorsement on the surface, with the gradual tightening of supervision, a large number of P2P platforms in the market have been found to have illegal acts and even run away in advance, resulting in the inability to recover the fund we have invested in time. This directly caused a serious disruption of the company cash flow, which was completely unexpected at the time. The capital chain problem didn't affect the main business. We couldn't continue mining as planned, nor could we deliver the product to the booked customer within the period agreed in the contract, and therefore we needed to liquidate damage as agreed in the contract, which caused significant economic losses to the company. This loss incident have made me more vigilant about financial investment. Learning to manage the enterprise while managing financial management is to protect the enterprise and be responsible to customer. We cannot influence customers' orders because our own mistakes. This is the bottom line of a conscientious enterprise.
Wow, interesting perspective. Looking at the supply chain overall, Where do you see the biggest risks? And how do you usually try to manage or reduce that risk?
Looking at the entire supply chain, I would say the biggest real risk lies in the transportation stage. Compared to transportation, the earlier parts of the supply chain are relatively more controllable for us. Extraction and processing are primarily managed in-house, and this implies that we have direct visibility and control to the extraction and the processing. We are also rather careful in terms of inventory. We also offer special storage conditions to feasibility, which are secure and safe, like in order to reduce risks inherent in damage or losses. They are the spearheads where the procedures and the standards can be effectively identified and adhered to. Transportation, however, is much more uncertain. There are many external factors that we simply cannot control. For example, during air transportation, unexpected turbulence may occur, and during sea transportation, bad weather or road sea condition can lead to potential damage. Even if everything is planned carefully, these risks are always present. And even when arranged specialized escort and take additional precautions, it's not possible to eliminate transportation risks completely. Because of this, transportation have always been a key focus on our risk management efforts. In practice, we incorporate greater manpower participation in the process of transport, which will be more closely monitored and coordinated. We also favor air transport when it is affordable, since it typically reduces the transit time, as well as the number of handling points. Meanwhile, prior to each shipment, we perform in-depth analysis of weather conditions, safety of roads, and the potential disruptions. I believe that a significant aspect in this regard is that our strategy is not on not being transported, which is unrealistic. It's rather being ready and minimizing the uncertainty as much as you can. This attitude has over time enabled us to be more systematic in dealing with risk and to safeguard the value of product along the supply chain.
After going through these challenges and risks, are there any rules or principles that you believe business in the jade mining industry must always stick to?
I think in the jet mining industry, we believe that the first thing that merchant must adhere to is the legal rules. For example, when signing a contract, all the terms in the contract will be clearly listed and will be notarized at the notary office. Notari's contracts have legal effect, which is the bottom line that we must strictly abide by. In addition to the legal level, we also attach importance to industry ethics and business integrity. The JET transaction itself has a large amount and a long cycle. If buyers and seller lack basic moral constraints and trust foundation, it's difficult to maintain cooperation for a long time. Therefore, we will take the initiative to provide customer with conditions that can support trust, such as clear information disclosure and transparent transaction processes.
In those principles, how do you actually make sure the quality and authenticity of your JIT? For example, things like traceability, certifications, or after-sales service. And what do you think customers are most concerned with based on your experience?
For us, the three keys to quality and authenticity are traceability, appropriate certification, and after-sales support. Firstly, customers want to know exactly where the jet comes from. We will provide customers with relevant supporting documents for family mines, such as land use right certificate and mineral ownership certificate, to prove that this jet raw material do come from our own mining resources. In terms of jet categories, we will also send raw materials to relevant authoritative institution for identification and issue a formal identification certificate to clarify the varieties and attributes of jet, so that customer can clearly understand the real situation of the purchased products. Additionally, in terms of processing standards, certification, credibility, and after-sales service, we all hold relevant certificates recognized by the state, with provide institutional guarantees for product quality. From the customer perspective, there are most concerns about three things. First, whether the product can be delivered smoothly according to times agreed in the contract. Secondly, whether the jet category is consistent with the contract. Thirdly, whether the workmanship quality of the finished product can meet expectation. These factors directly determine the degree of customer trust in us.
Looking back over all these years, what do you think played the most important role in helping the business grow? Was it experience, resource, your network, the brand, or the way the business was managed?
things are important: experience, resources, networks, brand, and management. One cannot really separate one with the other since all these work together with time. That said, if I look at the business today, I would say that networks have become particularly crucial, especially in the current environment. Having the right connection and the channels make a significant difference. For us, as a family business, we already have relatively measured experience, solid resource accumulation, and a well-established management model. These foundations were built over many years, and they continue to support the business. Because of that, at this stage of development, our focus have gradually shifted. We now pay much more attention to using networks to promote our brand and products. In the new digital and information age, networks have ceased to be tied to the personal relationships. Networks also encompass online platforms and the channels of communication. These networks allow us to expand our business reach more efficiently and open up new space for future growth. So overall, while all factors remain important, strong networks have become a key drivers in helping the business continue to grow and adapt to changing times.
That's really insightful. Thank you for sharing that. According to your experience, what do you suggest to the young entrepreneurs who are considering enter the jade mini industry?
Firstly, should I were to advise young entrepreneurs, I would say that jet meaning was not a resource-based business. It is also a Chinese luxury traditional industries, and as such, there is a lot of expectation in regards to ethics and long-term responsibility before entering the industry. A relatively mature management process should be established in the advance, and the true and error and judgment should be made in actual operation to reduce the risk that may be faced in the future. At the same time, it's also necessary to have an in-depth understanding of some hidden rules and capital management requirements in the industry. For instance, during the longer cycle after the delivery of the product, some funds cannot be used immediately, but need to be reserved as a risk reserve to deal with possible returns. Quality and judgment of or other emergencies. They are all the experience I have summarized in the actual business process.
Your advice is very practical, especially for young entrepreneurs today. I'm also interested, do you make use of some online or digital channels such as e-commerce, online streaming, and cross-border sales. What has been the result of this so far?
Yes, in recent years, we have actually started to explore more online and digital channels. This includes things like cross-border sales, e-commerce platforms, and also live streaming. To be honest, this has not been a very fast or sudden change for us. The older generation in the business tends to be more traditional. So, for a long time, our operations still relied mainly on long-term customers and word of mouth recommendations between clients. That has always been our foundation, and it's something we still value a lot. However, as the younger generation gradually became more involved in the business, we started to see things a little differently. We realized that the market is changing, consumer behavior is changing, and we cannot rely only on traditional ways anymore. So we began to actively embrace digital channels and test what works for us step by step. And then from that, we have observed so far, the results have been quite encouraging. These digital platforms allow many more people to see our products, including customers who we would never reach through traditional channels. More importantly, they create new opportunities for growth and for building long-term relationships with customers. Overall, we do believe that following the trend of these times is not just an option, but a necessary direction for the long-term development of the business.
Okay, thank you very much. There is just one point that I want to make before we end it, and that I would like to reflect on everything you have shared today. What you have told us today is extensive scaling and financial risk, trust, supply chains, and digital change. What do you believe was the state of thinking that enabled the business to continue and expand as you go through the entire journal?
Okay, I understand. Looking back on the whole development process, I think the most important mentality is long-term thinking. In this industry, people are easily attracted to short-term gains or rapid expansion, but this practice is often difficult to achieve truly sustainable success. Mainly, decisions need to be based on patience, self-discipline, and a clear understanding of responsibility. And another very important aspect is respect for customers, respect for partners, and respect for resources themselves. Jet meaning is not only a commercial activity, but also carries cultural values and social responsibilities. Once trust is destroyed, it's very difficult to rebuild it, and the price is often much higher than any short-term profit. At the same time, adaptability is becoming more and more important. Although the core principles of ethics and trust will not change, the way enterprises operate must be constantly adjusted. The market environment, customer expectation, and the technology are constantly changing. If enterprises cannot adapt to these changes, they will easily be eliminated. It's not easy to find a balance between tradition and innovation, but it must be done.
And this balance between tradition and change is actually quite challenging for many new entrepreneurs to achieve. From an educational perspective, what do you think business students can learn from your practical business experience?
Well, I think students first need to understand that business decisions in reali- reality are almost impossible to be perfect. In actual operation, uncertainty always exists, and frankly speaking, mistakes are sometimes inevitable. What really matters is not to completely avoid mistakes, cause it's almost impossible. But how to deal with these problems after making mistakes, and what lessons you really learn from them? Absolutely. Textbooks are, of course, valuable. They provide useful theoretical frameworks and ways of thinking. But the business environment in the real world is completely different. It can teach people more judgment, sense of responsibility, and stress resistance, which are often difficult to obtain by theoretical learning alone. So, I think students should not be in a hurry. You can start from a small stage, learn step by step, and lay a solid foundation first. Growth doesn't have to be fast to be meaningful. In fact, the slow and steady development of Lee can often build a stronger and more sustainable enterprise in the long run.
Okay, and that's the end of our question. Thank you very much for sharing your experiences and letting us know and enter the jade industry. Your sharing will help us better connect the theories learned in class with business practice. This interview gave us a deeper understanding of how entrepreneurship, business ethics, risk management, and the long-term strategy are combined in the real world. Thank you very much. We have really gained a lot.